Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of the Profitable Coaching Conversation Show. This is in honor of World Mental Health Day, and we're delighted to be here with you. It's a great panel of people who live and thrive with mental illness, and I want to begin by introducing you to them, okay? So first of all, Sean Pryor is a firefighter and mental health first aid trainer. He's also a provider in adult and youth mental health first aid. As a father and survivor of physical and emotional abuse as a child, he's passionate about building our youth and young men to be more than they thought possible. Once you hear Sean's voice, you'll understand why he's also a voice artist, lending his voice to various projects featuring services, products, and programs. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you so much for that awesome introduction.
Awesome, awesome. Sam Mitchell is a high school senior who was diagnosed with autism when he was 4. Although Sam has faced challenges along the way, autism never has had him. Sam is the creator and owner of the podcast, Autism Rocks and Rolls, which personifies his love of rock and roll music. Through Sam's podcast and public speaking, the messages and missions he wants to spread are, I am not broken, look at me, do not ignore me because I have autism, I'm a functional member of society, I can do what you do, just a little differently, but aren't we all different? I'm the voice of those who can and can't speak on the spectrum. Don't ignore and dismiss us. Recognize that we are a human being first. We just happen to have autism. Through Sam's endeavors, he wants to raise autism awareness, helping others understand what it is and how this condition can also be an ability, but not ignoring the fact that those with autism have daily struggles like we all do. Welcome, Sam, and your mom, Gina. Michelle Onhang is a highly credentialed leadership and life coach. She specializes in supporting individuals and families living with mental health challenges, as well as those moving forward after loss. Michelle was widowed at the age of 34 when her husband died by suicide. She has navigated her way through stigma, shame, and her own mental health challenges to rebuild her life intentionally. Michelle also facilitates workshops on topics that include mindfulness, personal development and empowerment, stress management, and developing a healthy mindset. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Rhonda C. Height is a human resources training consultant, author, and registered corporate coach. She works with organizations to design and deliver experiential training programs, support the human resources function, and provide business coaching services. In December 2018, her company, Let's Talk LLC, celebrated its 25th anniversary. A self-professed overachiever and relentless seeker of knowledge, Rhonda's appeared as a guest on local radio and television talk shows, won numerous speech awards, and formerly co-produced and co-hosted Dialogue in Motion, a lifestyle and current events radio talk show. She was named by Steed Media Group as one of Atlanta's 25 most influential women. Welcome, Rhonda.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome. Maxwell Bailey is an award-winning sales manager. At the age of 4, he was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. It was first misdiagnosed as ADD after he was referred to a neurologist. Later, after being on the wrong medication, he was finally placed on the right medication when he entered the 1st grade. During his elementary school years, he was supported by therapists, special education teachers, and his loving mom, me. As he grew and learned, Max found a love for reading, watching anime, and eating chicken wings. Today, he's thriving as an adult, working and living independently with new strategies for living with his ADHD diagnosis. Hey, Max.
Hi there. Thank you, Mom.
Yeah. That's the first time he heard that intro, by the way. So I know he was kind of like, okay, what's she going to say? Yeah, it was all good. It was all good. Paul Calcott is a young adult pastor living in Houston, Texas, a graduate of Mississippi College with a degree in Christian Studies and New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary with a Master's of Divinity in Collegiate Ministry. He's passionate about empowering and equipping people to be all that God has called them to be. His overarching life goals are to love God and to love his people. He recently launched a podcast called Real People, Real Talk as a way to continue fulfilling the Great Commission as we navigate this new normal created by the pandemic coronavirus. His podcast features rich and relevant conversations about current events, relationships, mental health, and much more, but from a Christian worldview. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, WendyY.
Awesome. Okay, and let me introduce our mental health professionals that are going to help steer our conversation around resources and opportunities for support. Dr. Keisha L. Mack earned her Bachelor of Arts degree and Master's of Education degrees from Howard University and her Doctor of Philosophy degree from the George Washington University. She is co-founder and Chief Operations Officer of the Mecca Group, LLC, a psychological and rehabilitative services practice and counseling firm whose focus is on providing high-quality mental and rehabilitative health services to the underserved and communities of color in the DC metropolitan area. Dr. Mack also serves as on staff at Georgetown University Hospital as clinical assistant professor and licensed psychologist in the Department of Pediatrics from 2007 to 2015. Her clinical experience includes working with at-risk adolescents and their families and young adults in settings such as residential schools, hospitals, and private practice. Her current interests include psychological testing, mood disorders, and business development and management. Welcome, Dr. Mack.
Thanks for having me, WendyY.
Is it Dr. Keisha or Dr. Mack?
I'm fine with either. Dr. Keisha's fine. Dr. Mack is fine.
Okay,
I'm not
awesome.
picky.
Awesome. Dr. Roberta Shaler, am I saying your name right, Roberta?
You are.
Okay, good. Dr. Roberta Shaler is known as the Relationship Help Doctor. She provides urgent and ongoing care for relationships in crisis. Her mission is to provide the insights, information, and inspiration for clients and audiences to know why and how to transform relationships with themselves and with other humans to be honest, respectful, and safe in all ways. Even though the U.S. Marines have sought her help, let me say that a different way. Even the U.S. Marines have sought her help. Dr. Roberta empowers the partners, exes, adult children, and coworkers of the relentlessly difficult, toxic people she calls hijackals, trademarked, to recognize emotional abuse, realize the effects, heal, and transform. She helps them see clearly, stop the crazy making, and save their sanity. Widely published and author of 16 books, including Escaping the Hijackal Trap and Stop That's Crazy Making, she is the host of the internationally popular podcast, Save Your Sanity, Help for Toxic Relationships. Her YouTube channel for relationship help has reached over 390,000 views. Welcome, Dr. Roberta.
Thank you so much, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah, I really wanted to do it. Let me just tell everybody, this was a passion project for me. My introduction is not something I have written down, but just very briefly, I was diagnosed with Major Depressive Disorder in my late teens, early 20s. And what most people don't know about Major Depressive Disorder, it really is a name for clinical depression. And it's what the mental health community refers to when they know your depression is not caused by some trauma or a tragedy or substance abuse. They know that it requires a chemical, what I like to call cocktail, to treat. And what I've learned over the years is depression, like you, Sam, doesn't have me. It's something that's part of who I am. And once I started to embrace it, that meant regularly taking my medicine. It also meant making sure that I paid attention to what was happening to avoid some of the bouts that would come, because it's not a steady cocktail over a lifetime. That cocktail can be changed based on environmental situations and situational things and hormonal stuff. So I've been through some of that as well. But what I've learned to do is I've learned to accept my diagnosis, live with it, talk about it. I've only been talking about it, believe it or not, for about 4.5 years, because before that, there was so much shame associated with it. So I wanted to do this podcast this episode, because I know there are a lot of people out there that are like me who've learned to thrive and embrace the mental illness, and we still show up powerful in the world. As you heard in the introductions, everyone on here is like outstanding, like they're thriving, they're doing major things. So let's kind of rewind the clock a little bit. Tell us, and anyone can speak, tell us when you were diagnosed and what were the circumstances of your diagnosis. Whoever wants to jump in.
So my name is Gina. This is my son, Sam. And like WendyY said, he was diagnosed with autism when he was 4. So Sam has his own podcast. When Sam was diagnosed, we knew something was up probably around when he was 2. He wasn't really playing with his toys like he really should. He was sorting them and he was lining them up. And if we would mess them up, he would get really, really upset. He hated really loud noises. So he was a very late speaker. He didn't really talk until he was like 3-ish. And then we knew something was kind of up. So we put him in a preschool with a teacher that could kind of recognize what was going on. And then when he was 4, he was diagnosed with autism.
Awesome.
And it's Asperger's actually. So it's very high functioning autism. And then just as the years went on, I mean, he's definitely had challenges and struggles, but we've just, like WendyY said, he has embraced it, because we've never taught him that it was anything.
You never taught me it was bad. I mean, it is what it is, but I'll manage, and look at me now.
Yeah, look at you now. Look at you now, Sam. You were going to say something, Cecilia.
So I was just going to say that I wasn't diagnosed until probably about 11 years ago. So when my youngest daughter was 2, and just had been married a little close to 4 years. And, things were going awry in my home. And my husband actually said, "There's something wrong with you. And I think that you need to go and see someone." And it wasn't until then that I kind of knew something was going on, just didn't really know what it was, and those of us who live with mental illness know that sometimes you're in a dark place. So I was often in a dark place a lot.
And what's your diagnosis, Cecilia? What's your diagnosis?
I am bipolar type 2, and also have anxiety, as well as depression. And so that's when I went to go seek help. It wasn't until then. So, I thank God for my husband, because living 40-something years and not being diagnosed at all, it was just a really hard thing for me. But just because he said you need to go and get help, I went and sought help. So,
you said that your home was in disarray. What kinds of things were happening?
I was setting it off a lot. So, I was doing a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming. And it just really it depended on whether or not I was feeling like there was a lot of structure in my home. So, it was the simple things such as, you didn't put the toilet seat down, or, there was like too much noise, or you invited someone over that I didn't feel that you didn't tell me about beforehand. And because of small things, it could be just anything. Because of the small things, I would just literally blow up, and I would go on a tyrant, and just, it was like I was going to demolish anything and anybody that was in my path. Mm-hmm. And that's how my family lived. We had, at the time, 3 kids in our home, my son, my daughter, and my youngest daughter. And it was, my kids will tell you that it was like my older kids will say it was like walking on eggshells sometimes. So you just never knew, you know, where I was going to come from. So.
Wow. What about you, Paul? When did you know that depression was something you were experiencing firsthand?
The summer of 2011, when I was supposed to graduate, but I didn't. And it was a couple of things together that made for a trigger. Number one, I experienced my first breakup, really didn't date until college. So I didn't know what does it feels like to be rejected. And so that started it off. But the big thing was I was in college 4 years, going into my 5th year. And that summer I went to the graduation and I had to walk out. Like, to see my class graduate, I just couldn't take that. So all those things just put me like in a dark place. You know, when you're an honor student and then you don't graduate on time, it just, you know, identity things going on. And I'm a pastor. I believe in prayer, but I also believe in counseling. Like, I didn't coin this phrase, somebody else did, but I believe you should pray and go to counseling. Mm-hmm. And so I went to counseling and it really helped me out. And that's when it kind of started. And it happened again when I moved to New Orleans, and just like a change of scenery. Mississippi was always home. So now I'm in a new city. My bills have doubled, but my income has been cut in half. And so different things would trigger it out. And so those are the things. And it's self-diagnosed. Like, the counselor or anybody didn't say, hey, this is what it is. But, you know, Google, and I was like, some mild case of depression. And so that's when it first started for me.
Wow. Wow. And Michelle, your story is very interesting. What I shared in your bio is that you are the survivor. You know, it started for you when your husband took his life ended his life by suicide. I can't remember how you phrased it in your bio, but that opened your eyes a little bit. Tell us a little bit of that backstory and share your own personal diagnosis and journey with mental illness.
Sure. So I'll start with my diagnosis, which actually only happened about 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. The actual diagnosis, but I had been living with depression and anxiety and PTSD for many, many years. So my husband died by suicide. He had been suffering from bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder. Mm. And it was pretty late stage by the time he had the diagnosis. The treatments weren't working. I think they were saying the only alternative for him that might work would be the electroshock therapy. And he was like, I don't want them frying my brain. And instead, you know, sadly, we lost him to suicide. Right. And then to make matters worse, because of the fear of the stigma and the shame, the family decided to say he died in an accident. Mm. And so we hid the truth for over 10 years. So that's where a lot of my own depression showed up, not being able to grieve the way I needed to grieve, not being able to talk about what we experienced because nobody knew he was sick either. The anxiety of worrying, who's going to find out? Am I going to be called out? I have 2 kids. They were 7 and 4 at the time, which, you know, I could justify to myself that, well, they're little. I don't understand how he did this. How do I tell these little ones? Mm-hmm. But over the years, the fear that the news might come out and they would, you know, they'd never speak to me, or, you know, any of the repercussions that would come from that. So I lived with that for close to 11 years. But the diagnosis came only after I did much of my healing work, shared the truth with my kids, shared the truth with the world, and started to do the work that I did. And my depression manifested in a way of pure exhaustion. I would sleep 12 hours at night and then nap 3 hours in the afternoon. And as an entrepreneur, I couldn't do that. I didn't, you know, I went to my doctor because I was like, I'm sleeping all day. I need to pay the bills, you know, but I didn't go. I mean, I think I lived the dark places, so I didn't recognize that. But the most interesting piece for me was when she did the full blood work, she said to me, do you know you had mono 2 different times in your life? You are showing antibodies for mono.
Wow.
And I had no clue. This was just my way of living, was just completely exhausted, not feeling, not knowing, that I didn't even recognize either of those times that anything was off.
Wow.
So yeah, that was.
So thank you for sharing. We're going to dig into some of what you shared in just a minute. Sean, tell us about, you're muted, so tell us a little bit about your diagnosis.
Yeah, so I guess my story is a little bit different in the sense that mine goes back between the ages of like 9 and 14. I lived in a house where my mom, she married a guy fresh out of prison. And unfortunately, I would say that was probably one of the most violent and tumultuous times in my life. Physical, sexual abuse. It was absolute just, and I won't go into it just on account of the fact, just I don't want to trigger anybody, but just absolutely violent time. I lived in a house where when I was 14 and when all of that violence stopped, it left me shook is the best that I can say. I was very nervous. I was very uncomfortable all the time. And for the most part, I had this thing where I love to say, you know, I just want to make things right for people. I just want things to be better for people. In the end, I lived in a house with a family that I know in many minority communities may be able to relate to say, you ain't crazy, so you don't need to talk to anybody. You are fine. You ain't talking to nobody. In the end, the state actually stepped in Chicago, and I started speaking with a counselor. After some time, I was diagnosed with PTSD. No medication, anything like that. But I saw that counselor until, of course, my family, you know, which I did for a while, and then we moved away. But that would be my story, is just post-traumatic stress disorder. Ironically, now as a firefighter, it gives me a chance to help other people with it. But that's my story.
Awesome. And Rhonda Height, tell us a little bit about your diagnosis and how you came to understand.
So I was diagnosed, and I don't even remember the exact diagnosis, but I do remember the date. It was in June of 1987. It was 6 months after my mother's death, and it was also after a suicide attempt. And during the 30 days that I was in the hospital, I know over the years, depression and anxiety, I'm not sure what I was admitted under at that time, because the first couple of days didn't even really know where I was. And so that was the first time, you know, I had growing up, you know, they used to call me a sensitive child. So looking back in hindsight, I realized that, you know, yeah, depression has been a part of my life for a long time, but that was the first time it was formally diagnosed, the first time that, but not the last, of course, that I was formally treated for that.
Awesome. And Max Bailey, tell us about your experience and your diagnosis. I shared a little bit in your bio, but you know, this is an opportunity for you to share about it from your perspective, from your vantage point.
I was pretty young when it first onset, so I don't really have particular memories of it per se, as far as understanding the gravity of what I was going through. But you know, I kind of look back on it like I was a very emotional kid, emphasis on very. And you know, when you're a kid, you already feel as if every situation that goes wrong is the end of the world already. And ADHD would compound that. And I would always find myself wondering, like, why do I feel so bent out of shape about this? Why is this affecting me so much more than other people? And another thing growing up is that how people would, I guess, treat you in different ways as a result of what they feel like they know about your mental illness or your mental disorder. And as a result, it's like they will put me in a box, and I would wonder what was that? What was it about the system? What was it about myself in relation to other people in the system that made things so vastly different for me as opposed to them? And I guess that shaped kind of my frustration going through school, working through social relationships, social relationships, whatever may have you. And I really just had to find a way going all the way up until adulthood, because, you know, some people say that you grow out of ADHD, but realistically, you grow up with it. And I just got to the point where I shattered the misconception that it was a detriment to me or a curse, but it was a gift. And it really enabled me to look at things from a different perspective. And perspective is everything, and perspective is important. And I kind of take power in that.
Yeah, awesome. So Dr. Keisha and Dr. Roberta, have we shared like all of the symptoms, if you will? Have we shared all of the scenarios that you've seen? If not, what are some of the other things that have led to people that you've treated or you've seen being diagnosed with these disorders?
So for me, yes, this is really, I've worked with pretty much everyone that has been speaking, someone who's had pretty much everything that we've discussed here, including myself. I have to share as well that I had a diagnosis during graduate school of clinical depression as well, triggered by, breakup. And I think I had already been unhappy prior with my choice of school, and then just not really addressing it. But the interesting piece is when my mentor in graduate school noticed, and she recommended that I go to counseling. Mind you, I am in a graduate program for psychology. I looked at her like she was like her head was turning around, like counseling, I don't need counseling. So even as someone who was going to school to become a psychologist, I too felt the shame and stigma in mental health. And it took a long time for me to actually step forward and then get the actual counseling and treatment, and did medication for a while. So I haven't had any additional experience with it. So I've worked through it and know how to manage it. But it's something that even those in the profession also are dealing with as well. So I think it's just really important to let people know that, they're not alone in that. And all the symptomology that you described, this sleeping too much, and that's one of a significant hallmark of depression, and the ADHD and being treated differently. I see that a lot. All these things, the bipolar and the mood swings. So everything that's been discussed here is pretty classic to some extent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add, Dr. Roberta?
I would agree with what Dr. Keisha said, of course. I fortunately did not experience those things, but what I did experience and why I do the work that I do as a specialty is that I was raised by two people with personality disorders, and I was their lucky only child. And from a very early age, because there was so much abuse going on of all kinds, I would look at them and go, I don't think you're right. So as they're like, actually my thought was, you guys are nuts, right? But the thing is that having experienced that, I not only became interested in it because you couldn't get any help back when I wanted help. When you're with a toxic person, particularly a toxic parent, they do this thing, and some of you may relate to this. They present a public picture of perfection, and at home they create a private place of pain. So when you go to speak about what's going on at home, someone says, "Oh, you can't say that about your mother. She's wonderful."
Shut you down.
Yeah. So, as yes, I have a doctorate in psychology and I have a master's in education. I became very interested in how do we convey this information, and, how do we help people with actually seeing that this is no good. And the thing we need to note on this World Mental Health Day, WendyY, is that the numbers of people, they never get diagnosed, because we all know people with personality disorders are perfect. So there's nothing wrong with them. They don't need any help. But it's really important to know that if you were raised in that situation, that you probably do need to sort that out with someone, because it has lasting impacts, particularly from your early years. And so that's very important to me, because the numbers of people who are behaving this way, and why I created the term hijackals, was because people were going to the internet and treating it like a clinical mental health professional. And so they would read up on the internet and they'd say, "Oh, I'm with a narcissist or a psychopath or a sociopath, and oh, that's terrible." But that's not for you to say. What for you to see is the cycles, the patterns, the traits, the behaviors, and be able to talk about those freely, and also to be able to talk about the fact that you are actually in that situation. You're not looking from it from far away. You're interacting, maybe even enabling it. So it's very important. So this is a great celebration to help people know, because the numbers of hijackals are growing.
Yeah.
For sure.
The thing that I'm always thinking of is movies. And I don't know if any of you saw the movie Prince of Tides with Nick Nolte and Barbara Streisand. And the crux of the movie, without going through the whole plot line, at the end of the movie, after going to a therapist to help his sister who had a suicide attempt, he finds out that he's the one who really needs the work. Like, it's not just his sister, but the whole family was impacted by mental illness in a big way. So I think that the fact that each of you are here says a lot about understanding and embracing your mental illness in a way that helps you to be healthy and whole and feel whole. Any other comments before we go to a break?
When the doctor said that, when you're living with someone with mental illness, they are a public, they could be seen as a public, I would say, success. And then at home, they're just going ballistic. Mm-hmm. And I always tell people that for me, it's when I'm out in public and I was really struggling, I live literally moment by moment by moment. And literally sometimes it's like minute by minute by minute by minute, because you are trying to keep it all together, right? When you're battling against your mind, I literally would just try and keep it together 1 minute at a time, 1 second at a time. But then when I came home, I was able to just release all of that. And I didn't have to try so hard. I could just breathe, because you had this whole day of just struggling to just maintain. And I would just get home and be able to just breathe. And my family knew who I was, but literally it was just exhausting to do the outside. And so when I came home, it was just like, okay.
Y'all get to see the real me.
Yes, yeah. So that's why that's the only comment I wanted to make. It's difficult to just balance those two worlds when you're really living in it, with not being diagnosed, and then even with being diagnosed.
It's still challenging. Dr. Keisha?
Yeah, I just wanted to add it. I think this group is a testament to, well, first of all, a lot of the, the diagnoses that were mentioned here are pretty common, and particularly depression and anxiety. And I think the group here is a testament that they are treatable, and you can, be successful with support, with treatment, getting the help that you need, so that everybody's here and able to talk about it. Just let people know that you can do something about it. It can be helped, and it's not something that has to be so debilitating that you can't move on with your life. So I think it's amazing that everyone's here and able to talk about it, because that's just going to let other people know that, hey, if I get help, if I put the supports in place, if I do the things that I need to do to treat this, then I too can be a successful person and live my life pretty normally. So,
awesome. Yeah, when we come back, go ahead, Paul.
I just want to say, like, one of the very toxic things that some families may say in their household, and I've heard it before too, is what happens in this house stays in this house. And I feel like your power can be taken from you if you don't speak up. But after speaking to y'all and hearing your voice, I just feel so empowered. Like, I told somebody else that I go through this too. And so on this World Mental Health Day, I just want to tell you, like, encourage those that's listening, take your power back. Share your story. You don't know how impactful and inspiring your story will be to the next person. So it's not always what happens in this house. No, we need to go tell somebody we need help. So I just want to say.
Yeah, very good, very good. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to start sharing and talking about some of the myths that are out there about mental illness, because I really want us to shatter those myths. A lot of them are false, and we need to look at them and talk about them. So we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back on this World Mental Health Day, and we're talking with people who have shared their diagnoses of mental illness, and from depression, mild depression, to major depressive disorder, to ADHD, to autism, Asperger's, to mild low-grade depression, to mental, I just could go on. I'm just like, we've heard from each of you, and there are a lot of different diagnoses that we've talked about. What are some of the myths that you've heard people have about your mental illness specifically? Who wants to go first?
I'd love to jump right into that, actually, if
Go
that's
ahead,
okay.
Matt.
One thing that I remembered really growing up very vividly, especially in the classroom, was that being in that different group of kids, there would typically be a group of us, probably no more than 4 or 5, who would be in the class, but we would come equipped with a teacher that would be there to give us some extra help. But as a result of that dynamic being in the classroom, there's a whole different approach to us in terms of we have to dumb it down for them, or we have to, there was a stigma in regards to how they would approach us. And it seemed like there was this, and there is still this misconception that I talked to some people about, where, you know, it's just an inability to focus. It's just this, it's just that. And, you know, that goes for things outside of ADHD, but in ADHD specifically, there's an emotional component of it. And that emotional component can, you know, add to the stress and add to the anxiety that's already a difficult aspect of the learning process for somebody dealing with ADHD. So all these things compounded together would just create this cocktail of frustration, stress, and anger going through this situation, from the standpoint that a common occurrence would be, and you know, Mom, I remember we would fight for this in going through the different grades, but math specifically, like, I was not necessarily a guy who was bad at math. I would have my difficulty with it because the common occurrence would usually be, I would figure out the solution, but my way in reaching the solution would not be the way in which we were taught. I would find my own way to get my own answers. And that was not just with math, but in every other aspect of my life, because of the way the ADHD would shape my thoughts and shape my approach in dealing with these different things. And what I would notice was, because it was so outside of the box, and because it wasn't something that was something that I hear even now in the sales world, if it's not something that's teachable, then it's not an asset. But, you know, sometimes that's not necessarily true. You have to figure out and pinpoint each person's skills and each person's specific approach and ability to pick up on those certain things to really condition them best learning experience. You know, I told you, and I'll share with the rest of the people here on the call, I'm actually doing a children's book called Me and My Friend AD, and it's pretty much shattering the misconception that kids and going into adulthood, but specifically kids with ADHD, have all these challenges and are behind the curve in regards or in relation to their counterparts, when really, if they're groomed and if it's nurtured the right way, they can really have not challenges, but superpowers, I call them, you know, because they're the ones that can really put the pieces of the puzzle together before anybody else. Their approach is just different. So really just shattering that whole misconception.
Yeah. And, you know, let me just add to that. As I said before, Max is my son. And as a single mom growing up with a child who was diagnosed with ADHD, I really forcefully became his advocate. So when he talks about things that we fought for in the classroom, what I know today that I didn't know was a motivation back then was my advocacy helped him to be able to get what he needed at that age, so that as an adult, he could thrive. Because I see him today compartmentalizing things in a way that supports his lifestyle. I see him organizing his thoughts and relationships and everything in a way that's based on some sort of, I tell him all the time, you're a unicorn. And it's based on his own way of thinking about it. And it just made such a difference for him. Any other myths out there?
I have one.
We were going to say, I was going to piggyback off of what you just said with being Sam's mom. And then super that's the way I am. Is he? I don't even look at autism as a mental illness most of the time, because Sam has all of these strengths and all of these superpowers because he has autism.
Yeah,
and he's very good at things because he has autism.
Yeah, I can be. Let's see. Most of my thoughts are creative. I can say that backwards. What? Shock. No, I'm kidding. No. But yeah, I would say I'm very creative, but people, the big myth is that when someone has autism, that they're automatically aren't going to make it into the world, that like they're going to look like their parents for the rest of their life. No, that's not the case. We'll make it, just with some help.
Yeah, that's just to piggyback what he said too. There's a stigma that Sam is broken, and that Sam is fixed, and he's not. He's Sam, and it's just the way that he thinks. It's to us, autism is simple brain wiring.
Yeah, it's never been a mental disorder actually to us.
I've never treated him when he was diagnosed. I mean, I didn't know a lot about it. We did all of this research, and we have always treated Sam that this is the little piece of you. There's so many other pieces to you, and you choose whether you put first or last, or it's really up to him. So there's never been a shame, and he's always embraced it. And I think where the podcast idea came from, because he is so passionate with it.
I mean, look at the shirt.
You got your shirt on?
What does it say?
It says, let me read this. I rock out a different tune.
I love it. I rock out to a different tune. Nice. Very, very nice. I just pinned you to the video so we could see it. So that's great.
Yeah, that's the thing too with his shirt is I feel like we're all different. Sam, like we always say when we're talking to people, there's no normal. Nobody gets to pick what's normal. And
I'm
pretty sure that normal. I'm sure. I just that we've never really used that term in our house. We are who we are, and it's not abnormal. It's not a mental illness. It's just Sam. So that's how it's him.
Dr. Keisha, I saw you unmute. You wanted to add something.
What you were saying about the advocacy, it's very important and it really plays a big role in the trajectory of your child's life. If you have a great advocate, you will end up seeing someone who can be very productive and do very well. And then it also can have the opposite effect if you don't have that advocacy in your life. I see it a lot in the children and families that we work with, that when they have a very strong parent and advocate who gets in there right from the beginning, works with the teachers in the schools and demands that they have everything that they're supposed to have when they're supposed to have it and never back down, they have kids who are doing really, really well. But at the same time, which is part of why we do work with the populations that we work with, the underserved and in communities of color, because a lot of times they don't have that strong advocacy. And we feel like we have to do a lot of that advocacy work, even though we're not necessarily the parents, but that's something that's really, really important is that advocacy work.
Nice.
I had a teacher myself. And so that I feel like that was a plus for Sam, just because like WendyY, my husband and I fought really hard just to
get in a general ed classroom.
Yeah, I mean, he was in a general ed classroom and I knew the laws but you're right. There's so many families out there that don't, and I've seen it from both sides, from a standpoint and a parent standpoint. So the resources are very, very important for the child to have.
Very nice. Very nice. We're going to talk about resources a little bit later, but I want to make sure we've covered all of the myths that exist for your particular area or diagnosis, or what you've seen as myths that really can be shattered.
I'd
Well,
like to say something about people who are in a toxic relationship.
Mhm.
And this may be kind of a backwards myth, but I'd like to share it because there will be people listening who will relate to this greatly, which is that if you happen to get into a romantic relationship, a marriage, a partnership, have children with a person who is a hijackal, a person who has these patterns, traits, and cycles, it's really important to understand that that's where you are, and to know that all the love in the world will not make a huge difference. And you can overextend yourself, you can put yourself down, you can give up your life, you can become a doormat, you can, make yourself into a pretzel. And it really won't change it, because it's not a love deficit that they have. And it's kind of a myth, as good people, good-hearted people, warm-hearted people, we think, oh, well, if we love someone enough, then they'll finally feel secure, they'll feel stable, they'll feel loved, and they can relax, and it'll all be good, and they'll stop behaving as though they have to rule the world and they're the smartest person in every room and have control over everything. That's a myth.
Yeah, totally. The only thing I want to add is that a quick story. I remember for years I was just afraid to share with anyone that I suffered with depression. And you guys can help me, Dr. Keisha and Dr. Roberta, but what I've seen and experienced at this point, looking back, is that people are at different spaces and places with their depression, and they need to be treated individually as a result. I remember sharing once with a partner. I was partnered with this guy we were working on a project for an organization, and I had missed a day, and it was one of those days where it was rainy and cloudy, and back then I didn't know that was a trigger for me. I just wanted to stay in the bed. And so I canceled our meeting, and when we met again, I was like, since we're going to be working together, I need to tell you something. And when I told him I had depression, he said, "Oh, WendyY, I'm so sorry. Wow, WendyY, I'm so sorry." And I thought, what did I say to him that he responded that way? And for me, it wasn't debilitating. What really struck me was that my depression wasn't debilitating. What struck me was that he was treating me like I was less than. And it was so shocking and overwhelming that it colored our relationship going forward. We worked through it, it was fine. But to me, there's a myth associated with living with mental illness that you can't function, that you're always struggling. And that is so much a myth. Everybody on here, whether you have depression or bipolar disorder or Asperger's or whatever it is, every one of the people who are here are high functioning individuals that live with mental illness. Okay. So the myth is you can't function, you can't achieve, you can't accomplish. People who are here, pay attention, listeners and watchers. The people who are here have high level degrees, they're award winning. There's a lot of stuff, credentials, a lot of things we've been able to accomplish in life because we are high functioning and we have mental illness. Anybody want to add anything before we go to a quick break?
I would just say, Wendy, why for me, I think that one of the things that I hear people, I think Paul said it best, what goes on in this house stays in this house, right? But for me, I think that when people say, oh, don't tell your kids, that you're suffering from mental illness, whatever type it may be, because if they're too young, they may not understand. I flipped that. I said, I'm telling my children everything.
Yeah.
Because if I don't, then they're not going to be able to understand when I'm not having a not so good day. To me, it's allowed my family to open up and begin to talk about the things that they're suffering from. My children are now talking about, if they're feeling depression or their level of anxiety and different things like that. So it has freed up my family, my husband and our children so much that I would say that's I am in total disagreement with that. You should tell your children and your family and your friends, you know, if you feel comfortable outside of your home, because then they know when you're not having not a not so good day, or they may check on you because they haven't heard from you in a while and you may be suffering in secret. So, and that could be one day you need someone to come in and save your life. So
very nice. Yeah, very nice. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the resources that you found and you're willing to share with our viewers and our listeners. Be right back. Okay, so before we went to the break, we were talking about some of the myths associated with mental illness. And I know, Dr. Roberta, you said that there was something you wanted to share about what Cecilia said.
Yes, Cecilia was making a really good point in a healthy family to say, tell your children, tell your partner, please don't do that if you happen to be in a family where the other parent is a hijackal, because they will use that against you in every possible way, and you can end up very, very alone.
Good job, good job. Dr. Keisha.
Yeah, one of the biggest myths that I wanted to discuss quickly was that, in particular for people of color, that we actually don't have mental health concerns. We don't have depression. We don't have anxiety. We don't commit suicide. We just are strong, and we're going to push through and get
our way through it. Yeah.
Everything. So that is absolutely, positively one of the biggest myths in communities of color, is that we don't have mental health issues, that we are too strong, and that we're able to push through things. And that is not true. As you can see, there are lots of Black and brown folks on this screen who have all admitted to having mental health issues. And I just think it's so important that we begin to recognize that and talk about it loudly and let the world know.
Proudly. Yeah, proudly.
Absolutely.
What were you going to say, Paul?
I would say one myth is that happy people don't get depressed, or you can
not true.
Right, exactly. You can insert almost any adjective. The happy friend, the funny friend, the strong friend, the Christian or the pastor. I'm here to tell you, like, y'all know this, like, depression does not discriminate. I remember when I was in seminary, I wrote a paper, and one of the things that I learned, I forgot who said it, but depression is like the common code of life. In other words, we all go through it, just in different seasons and different ways. And like my parents, like before I had to release, I did an episode about it. Before I released it, I had to have a conversation with them because I don't want to surprise them with the podcast. But they know me for like all my life, obviously. They didn't know. They didn't know. And my mom was like, I knew some things was going on, this and that, but it's like they really didn't know. And so I'm just here to tell you, depression does not discriminate. You can be happy. A happy person can be a depressed person. So that's another myth.
Awesome.
And there's levels of depression too that definitely needs to be clarified. You know, most people have the blues, feel down. You know, we all go through that. And then there's clinical depression. There's, you know, major depression episodes, and then you have recurrent. So there's level of depression. And so not everyone is going to experience, you know, clinical depression. They may just have, you know, the blues or have a bad day, that kind of thing. And it doesn't necessarily require the same level of support and treatment that someone who has major depression or clinical depression might have.
Yeah. One of the things that kept happening for me was I would try medication, and then when I felt better, I stopped taking it.
Yep.
But I had what you described as recurrent depression. And it became really, really, really clear for me that it wasn't just the blues. It wasn't just I was tired and needed to sleep. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't what you have when it's just low grade or mild grade. It was full-blown major depressive disorder. It was a loss of motivation, a loss of concentration, a loss of energy, because depression has a physical component to it as well as a mental component. So I was tired all the time, and there was no physical reason for me to be tired other than the physical reason of depression. So there are a lot of myths about what depression looks like. And I learned that it's not always the same. It's not always the same, to your point.
Absolutely.
Dr. Keisha, you were going to say something, Rhonda?
Well, kind of, you started it with what it looks like. That's one of the myths. People think you can look at a person and tell that they have a mental illness, you know. I know I get, once I, you know, kind of started talking to people about it, I got that reaction, girl, you don't look crazy. And I'm like, because I'm not. You know, educate yourself. And it's just, you know, to me, I'm like, nah, how can you look at a person? But that's one of the myths. People feel like they can eyeball you and know, you know, and that's not true.
Yeah, not true at all. Go ahead, Roberta.
I just want to speak to something Sean said earlier, because I think this is another myth that deserves some airtime. And that is that the whole idea of PTSD, well, we understand that in war and first responders and things, but we often downplay the effect of having witnessed trauma as well as experiencing trauma, or having a friend or relative close to us go through trauma, and then we have a response to that, and somehow we're not acknowledged for having taken that on. You know, we could be very empathetic, but we could also have a very vivid understanding of what happened and hear it over and over and over again, and it will have a response in us. And I think, Sean, you were mentioning that sense of, you know, trigger things and things that go on, and that really needs attention.
Yeah,
without question.
I agree with that, absolutely.
But I do think that that's why the secrets in families, especially in the Black community, I know that in our household there was a lot of abuse towards my mother. And so I witnessed a lot of things up until I was 16. So, but the secrets that were in our family did not equate to success in our family. So for us, now that I came out and wrote my book and I'm sharing my story, my family wants me to, if they could take my book off of Amazon, they would dial that thing back in, because they don't want people to know about what's going on in your household, because it's the success of a family that people want folks to see, and really not deal with the impact that this abuse had on the different members of our family. Nobody has dealt with it. To the extent where they've gone to seek help. I am the youngest, I would say, in my family, and the first in my family that have came out and said, this impacted my life. I have PTSD from it. I'm bipolar. I have anxiety and depression. And here's my story.
Yeah.
And so my family now, some of them are not even talking to me just because of a book.
Wow, that's incredible. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to my pastor, and this was during one of those, I say a few, it's been probably about 12 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I was talking to my pastor, and he asked a question that I thought I knew the answer to. He said, does mental illness run in your family? And it stayed with me because I realized over the years, the answer is yes. When I look at, this aunt that went through this, or that sister who went through that, or that brother, it's mental illness. We just didn't call it that as a family. And while they sought help or treatment in their own way, it still was mental illness that runs in the bloodline. You know what I mean? And that became clear for me even after I had Max. Like after I gave birth to Max, I was like, you know what? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. That question was posed to me, and it's always something that I'm thinking, because when you answer yes to that, you're able to look at your family and say, wow, okay, this is part of who we are as a family. And based on that, I know how to interact in certain situations with them because of that. There's a more openness to it, if you will. Somebody else.
I wanted to say, actually, I'd like to build off what I was going to say something else, but it's interesting because, to speak to what Dr. Roberta was saying about the toxic families, I grew up in a very toxic family. One of my parents, I believe, has a personality disorder, but, they won't go see anybody because everyone else is the problem. But it's just realizing that, and my other parent, I'm pretty sure has severe depression. And so growing up with this idea of this is what a normal family looks like, I then married into a family that was very similar to my own. And after I lost my husband and started to date again, I found partners that were very similar again to that toxic pattern. And so recognizing that it may run in the family, but also looking at the choices that we are making. And it was only when I was in the last relationship that I was in that I woke up and said, oh my gosh, it's me. I keep perpetuating this pattern, which is actually quite empowering. It's not blaming in the sense that now I can do my healing work and hopefully change it. And that's what got me to then do all the deep work, because I realized I can find another partner, but it's the same, different person, but the same story that we keep reliving. And so just looking at that and knowing that we do have choices, even though we might have a diagnosis, there are so many ways that we can look at our life and see where we are at choice. Just our mindset, our health, our lifestyle, so many things that we can be doing to contribute and make our lives better.
So I want to start with you by asking this question, Michelle. What's something that people would be surprised to know about you, understanding that you live with depression and PTSD?
I think, well, I haven't spoken much about my family of origin. So I know, because, and that was the thing growing up with that, we don't talk about things. So the whole idea of secrecy. So, we were the mask of perfection and then carried that forward. But yeah, like many people will look at me and say, oh, wow, she's had it pretty good. And it's like, actually, I struggled for most of my life.
So let me ask my question to you a different way.
Okay.
When people find out that you have depression and PTSD and they look at your accomplishments in your life, what would they be surprised to know that you've accomplished in spite of your PTSD and depression?
Well, I think for me, the biggest accomplishment was going against the grain and going public about my husband's suicide. And there's still many people who are not acknowledging that I've done that, or that do not acknowledge the work that I do, because I think it's
people in the family.
Yes, yeah, and family, friends, because I broke a pattern. So it's confronting for many people, and people don't realize as well. After my husband passed away, because there was very little acknowledgement about what he was actually going through, that when he died, there were people that, I don't understand. Did you do this? Did you do that? I was blamed for a lot of things, of not doing enough. And lots of rumors went around because some people are trying to understand something that can't be understood. So, and I don't talk about that often, because I understand now that, they're coming from a place of hurt and pain and fear and their own wounds. But yeah, there was that added challenge of all the stigma of, somehow this must be your fault. And I did take that on as well. What Dr. Roberta was saying earlier of, somehow thinking if we love them enough, we can fix them. I was definitely in that headspace. So then I perpetuated and thought, oh, maybe somehow it is my fault. It's probably a good idea that we keep a secret.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. So Rhonda, I know you have to leave in just a second. So I want to hear from you. What would people who have depression and some other things you experienced, what would people be surprised to know about you, knowing that they have certain thoughts or misconceptions about your diagnosis?
That's a hard question to answer because number one, outside of writing about it in the book, I haven't just talked about it broad spread, people in my personal universe, people in my network, few colleagues and things like that are aware, and I've just received a lot of support. So I haven't, outside of that, well, you don't look crazy, I haven't gotten, I don't know if there are conceptions that they have. They cheer me on, and they understand that, number one, that I deal with this condition, and they understand that I've gone through, as all of you on the broadcast today have gone through a number of things. In fact, even today, I almost called you this morning, WendyY, and said I can't do it because the call that woke me up was that a good friend and my mentor died last night. And that just kind of put me into a real funk, put me in a real space. And I was like, okay, you know what? She would really be mad at you right now if you said.
I wouldn't have been mad. I would have been disappointed.
Now, I ain't talking about you. I'm talking about my mentor. Not that I don't care about your feelings, but I'm concerned about her. I'm concerned about her. And I'm like, she would be so disappointed because part of the reason I think people have supported me, because they see no matter what, I keep moving in a forward motion. I keep getting up. I keep getting up. And so I don't know that there are people in my universe that don't believe in me in that way. If they have, they low-key hating because they've kept it to themselves. But I've been very blessed to have a lot of support and understanding, around dealing with bouts of depression and everything that goes along with that. So
nice.
I don't know.
So I know that, thank you, Rhonda. And I know Sam and Gina, what would people be surprised about you? And let me just say, before you even say anything, I think the fact that, Sam, you have a podcast that is rocking and rolling in its own right is a huge accomplishment. I think you are high functioning, like beyond high functioning. That's my perception. So is there something else that you might add to that?
Well, first of all, thank you, I guess. And second, so did you say you want something you don't know about me, or something you don't know about autism?
Something people don't know about you that they would be surprised to know, given that you have Asperger's.
Okay, I gotcha. Well, let's think here. Well, I actually can be a very creative writer and can have a vocab, I guess is the way to put it.
Quick fire, quick-witted, and a huge vocabulary. Is that what you said?
Yeah, and a writer.
Nice. Nice, very nice, very nice. So Cecilia, I know that you had something to say about accomplishments or what people may be surprised to know about you.
Yeah, so for me, I think one of the biggest surprises is that I've been married for 15 years with mental illness. A lot of people, when they look at a person, when they find out that you have mental illness, they're like, well, oh my God, you just don't seem like it. You're just so, put together, and you have so many things going on in your life. They're just surprised that I've been able to stay married for 15 years in spite of everything that I've gone through, as well as, getting a master's degree in the midst of, not being diagnosed, or just on the, just being diagnosed. Been able to be successful in a Fortune 100 company. And so it's people are shocked. They're like, I just can't believe that you've gone through all this stuff, but you have all of these accomplishments. I always say it wasn't easy. There were days that I didn't want to get up out the bed. There were days where I didn't want to be a wife or a mother. There were those days, but by the grace of God, I was able to get up and still move through life. And that's the only way that I can explain it. So
yeah, the thing that I want people to understand after watching and listening to this episode is that, yeah, we've had challenges, but we've pushed through them. We've gotten the support we needed. We've gotten the treatment we needed. And we've created opportunities that we've been able to successfully navigate. Some of that is education and higher education, higher degrees, graduate degrees. Some of that is winning awards. Some of that is getting credentialed. Some of that is like we still live and thrive like everyone else does. We just happen to have mental illnesses.
Right.
So we do what we do, you know, and it works for us. I want to close us out by talking about resources and support. And I know, Sean, in your introduction, I talked about your training. So you want to talk a little bit about that and as a resource for people who are watching and listening?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Mental health first aid. And I think if I can just button this in with it, what you were saying earlier, something people would be surprised about. I think people would be surprised that I am a mental health first aider. And I'm going to explain what that is, but I want to say what we do is I am not a doctor. I am not a therapist. There are wonderful resources out there like that. But what mental health first aiders do, and especially something I like to do, especially being able to do it with youth and with adults, is to help people who are in a mental health challenge or people who are in a crisis get hooked up with the resources that they need. What makes that so important is that, as we've been discussing, and I don't think it's a secret, a lot of times in our minority communities, it is billed as it is not okay to get help. I went through that as a child. As such, having an advocate, somebody, that's the logo if you've ever seen it. Mental health first aiders are going to be the people who are, for example, something I love to do is to just ask somebody, how you doing here today? Everybody always says fine. My favorite thing to say is, are you really? Are you really fine? And that's that opening. That's, I want some more. What's going on? But I want to say that resource, if you can find your mental health first aiders, Google it, research it. I'm a trainer. I love to train people because it puts more boots on the ground and it puts people in areas that may be underserved, people that you may think are overserved, people that are super affluent, people that it does not discriminate. Mental health challenges do not discriminate along any lines. And that's something that I know, again, like I say, for me, someone who was discouraged at one time from getting help, having resources around from people who can push you in that direction, basically hold your hand if you need it and say, it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. It is perfectly acceptable. And it is more than acceptable to be able to get the help. And that stigma does not have to be the thing that stops you.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm also a mental health first aider, so very proud to say that. Was supposed to become a trainer, but COVID happened and they won't move the training online.
The training is online and I train online. So
they're not offering, I'm in Canada, so they're not training trainers online. We have to wait till it's in person. I used to live in Vaughan,
by the way.
Oh, really?
I love it.
Cool.
I love it.
But yes, mental health first aid is such an important course that I think everybody should be taking because it really educates you about the most common mental health challenges that people just don't even know to identify. And again, yes, it's like CPR, but for mental health. So helping people that are in some kind of crisis, get them the resources that they need. It's, a weekend course and so crucial.
I love it because at the very heart of that is de-escalation. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Supporting everyone and de-escalation has to be a big part of that. And I want to say, I don't know if it was you and I talking, but I was talking with somebody in the last couple of weeks. And when people are hearing about defunding the police, I don't want to get on a political soapbox, but I just got to say this whole idea of a mental health trainer in those situations is part of the whole process and program for defunding the police. It's putting people in place that have these skills that can de-escalate in a big way. Dr. Keisha.
Yes, actually in DC, and we're part of this project with the district, they have put teams together, community response team is what it's called, and they actually go out with the police. They just started that last October. So there's the emergency crisis team, there's the community response team. Well, the whole project is the community response team, but it consists of the crisis response, mental health professionals, and then the police as well. So when calls come in, we have our staff go out with the cops in particular situations where there might be a mental health crisis, or if they're not sure what's going on, they have mental health providers to go out in the community with them. So that's the kind of thing that we want to see more of when you're talking about defunding police. That's what that's about. So it's starting in some places, but it's definitely not something that you're going to see everywhere, but it needs to be.
Yeah. Paul, did you have any resources that you wanted to share that have been helpful for you?
Sometimes I like to say that I am the practical pastor, so I'm about to do some practical resources. So those that have those credentials, feel free to add like the real things. But I would say Jesus, like my relationship with Jesus is key. Number two would be my support system, and a part of my support system is counseling. Like the story I like to tell, like if I have a headache, I'm gonna pray about it. I believe in the power of prayer. If that headache keep going, I'm gonna pray again, but I'm gonna get some Advil. Now, if that headache continues, I didn't pray enough. I'm about to go see a professional. And so the same way that the Lord blesses us with medical doctors and with dentists, he also blesses us with therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health experts, etc. And so, yeah, that would be like the second one. And then the third one, I am an advocate for self-care, and I have a self-care routine. Before COVID, it was playing a lot of basketball, but now I'm figuring out a new routine. And so, yeah, Jesus, your support system, going to counseling, and having a self-care routine, just the practical ones for like the mild depressive, because I know as you get deeper, you need, more things.
Sure. First, nice. I'm going to come to you, Max, because I know you have a way that you found that helps you. So I'm going to come to you and ask you about your resources and what you recommend.
Yeah, I was actually going to say my ADHD and also my methodology or my routine has actually what has kind of coalesced me into the atmosphere as far as work that I'm in right now. Just for those of you on here and those of you listening, I work in the CBD industry now. And one thing that I tell a lot of people is that for the longest, I used marijuana as a resource to medicate, as a way to treat my anxiety, to treat my my ADHD. And in some cases, it did help. I'll be honest, but to be honest, there were also there were a lot of other ways that it hindered me, because there are upsides and downsides with just about anything. Then I started really doing my research into cannabis and the effect that it had in relation to certain thought processes and certain chemical imbalances. And I found that implementing that worked a little bit better without the downsides that marijuana brought to the situation. But all that is great. All the treatment, the medication is fine, but I am a firm believer that you can use all the physical resources that you want, but unless you have something as far as implementation, as far as methodology, as far as things that you trained yourself, things that you've been taught, things that you in the clinch, you have your words of affirmation, you have your or positive affirmations or you have ways in which to deal with it before you use that substance as a crutch. Because I feel like a lot of young men, particularly a lot of young black men, I tell a lot of my clients when I talk to them in my mentorship program, I tell these guys, to paraphrase Baldwin, to be black and to be relatively conscious is to be anxious all the time, is to be nervous all the time. And I feel like jumping back to the one of the past questions, one misconception I feel like is that people with mental health issues are the minority. I would venture to say that we are the majority. And if we were to look around and kind of flip that on its head, we would be more so open as a society to figuring out what ways to deal with them instead of drown them, instead of hide them. Because I feel like that's what a lot of these things are. That's why, I have a wide variety of friends who, whether it's marijuana, whether it's alcohol, whether it's coffee, or pain pills or things like that. That's something that I see daily. You know, people find these different things, and as opposed to like Paul said earlier, you know, his would be praying about it first. You know, there has to be something implemented as far as your approach before you automatically jump to, I'm going to rely on this. Because if you do put that into place, I feel like, number one, it builds up a dependency, and then also it becomes a detriment to you instead of a benefit.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the best way that I can encompass all that in my point.
Yeah, awesome. So we're gonna close things out. Thank you guys so much for being here and sharing your stories, your wisdom, your resources. I know there are more resources to share, and we're going to include them in the show notes. But I just thank you guys all for being here to celebrate World Mental Health Day. Hopefully we have shattered some of the myths. Through your stories, people have learned and been inspired to take action to either support or get help that they need. Through the resources that have been shared and will be shared in the show notes, people will see opportunities to learn and grow and thrive with mental illness. Thanks everybody so much for being here for this special episode of the Profitable Coaching Conversation Show. We'll see you next time. Thanks.